What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
Guys, today we are getting into the 3 keys to victory for Umar Nurmagomedov as he takes on Merab Dvalishvili and tries to become the bantamweight undisputed champion. And Nick, I think we get right into point number 1. And the first key to victory for Umar is going to be really important for him to exploit Merab's somewhat predictable tendencies in his grappling offensives. You know, Merab Dvalishvili is a very linear pressure fighter, and we've seen that almost throughout his entire career, with the exception being the Sugar Sean fight. He sort of played on the outside and cut some angles, but I'm expecting Merab in the Umar fight because he knows Umar's not going to be afraid to come to him like Sean was in certain aspects of the fight. I think we're going to see a lot of that linear pressure out of Merab, and we do see a lot of the same tendencies, you know, looking at the legs before he shoots a takedown, a lot of feinting. He does a lot of movement with his arms and his hands, and I think Umar can exploit some of those moments because Umar is not going to be like Sean where he's, you know, afraid to engage because of the fear of the takedown. Umar is going to be there in range, which if Merab is somewhat predictable in his tendencies, which he has been in the past, Umar can start to take advantage of the striking where he has a massive advantage. So what is your take on point number 1, the exploiting of Merab's predictable tendencies?
I think that's a great point. And you're right, Merab has always been a pressure fighter. And when we saw him come out so calm and patient against Sugar, it was very different, but it worked really well. So I'm eager to see what he does with Umar, but that isn't going to work like it did for 25 minutes against Sugar against Umar. Umar eventually is going to close the distance, and you don't want to be fighting on your back foot against Umar Nurmagomedov. Merab knows that, so he's, I'm sure, going to be trying to implement some of his own pressure and own attacks on the feet, unlike he did against Sugar Sean. That was sort of just a wait until the range is close enough and then get the fight to the ground type of situation. Umar is going to be able to fight in all aspects and in all ranges very well with Merab. So I think if Umar goes out there and really does exploit some of those tendencies like you're talking about, not the highest level or not the most creative feints, but he'll throw the same ones over and over again. So Umar should be able to pick up on some of those reads and maybe exploit him on some counters after that. But if Merab doesn't mix up some of the angles, doesn't mix up some of the direction that he decides to pressure from, I have a feeling it's going to be hard for him to find his way in being a linear pressure fighter on Umar, because Umar is very good at using angles, using distance, and he's really good with his long strikes, long kicks. So when you've got somebody who's chasing and you can create a slight angle off, they're actually closer than they might realize at times, and you can get your own significant strikes off from an angle on a guy who's just being patient or trying to pressure you in certain directions.
Yeah, and you know, Merab is very much the striking for him is a means to an end rather than it is for him to go out there and look to put somebody away with his punches or his kicks. He's almost like a Colby Covington, a better version of Colby, albeit, but, you know, a very similar strategy. We have great cardio. I have a better pressure game than you do. My wrestling is better. I'm going to use my striking not to knock you out. I'm going to use some volume, and I'm going to use that to get in on you and take you down and rinse and repeat until I ultimately get my hand raised in a decision, which I think that will open up for Umar some opportunities if he's aware of them. You know, Umar's got really sneaky strikes. He's got great question mark kicks. His hands are pretty good. Umar also covers a lot of distance when he strikes. If you watch him, he'll start a combination with his back against the cage, and he'll end up on the other side of the cage with his opponent's back against the cage, just in a single combination. And he's not going to be afraid to do that against Merab because he's not afraid of being taken down. Umar Nurmagomedov is equally as comfortable on the ground as he is on the feet. And I would argue that he's a better submission artist, and I think the facts bear that out, that he's got more, he's a bigger threat on the ground than Merab is as far as finishing the fight is concerned. So he's not going to give Merab the same luxury that Merab had against Sean O'Malley, which is that he can pick and choose when he wants to go in. And that's why I think Merab's coming into this fight a little bit different. He's going to try to bring the pressure to Umar because the path to victory for Merab is a bit more narrow than it is for Umar. And he's got, if he's going to win this fight, he's got to get him to the ground. And that's going to open up some of those feints, some of those level feint. And we talk about feints, you know, it's not just with the hands, it's not just with the hips and showing kicks and stuff. You can feint with the eyes, you can level change. And Merab does a lot of that, but Umar, because his striking's better, if he can pick up on some of that, then he can start to exploit Merab, and that's where some of those big shots early on might register for Umar, which could change the course of the fight.
Right, and when you talk about like tendencies that you see over and over again, Merab, there's some highlights of him on his way to the title, getting caught by multiple opponents with the exact same combinations. I'm drawing a blank on who exactly it was, but he walks into some shots in every fight. He just can't avoid it, even though he's fully aware of it now, and it's just one of those things. So he's got to be very cautious about those types of things, because Umar is a far more powerful striker than he is, and he's crafty on the inside. And I think those sorts of things are what's going to lead Umar to finding those openings that he's going to have to find on Merab, because if he doesn't have any success on the feet, we might find a very boring fight, and then Umar, looks for some offense and keeps the fight pace very slow. But I believe if Umar comes out and fights at a high pace, striking and grappling, just high paced all the way around, take a machine to the machine, I think he has a better chance at overwhelming Merab and eventually possibly tapping into that gas tank that seems to be never ending.
Yeah. And speaking of tapping into the gas tank, that brings me to point number 2, which is to utilize body kicks of all forms.
Yes.
Going back to the O'Malley fight again, because I think it's a great point of reference. Yeah. Not that Sean and Umar are very similar, but they both are really good strikers.
Right.
And the only success really that Sean had against Merab was at the end of the fight, and it was with some beautiful push kicks. I mean, Sean throws that kick really well, and some of those really hurt Merab, but it was obviously too little too late. Now, Umar has a wide variety of body kicks that he can go to.
Right.
He's got great teeps and push kicks. He's got a really good side kick that I think will be great for distance management. And then he also has a good power body kick as well. And I think you utilize different kicks for different outcomes. Obviously, the teeps and the push kicks, that can tremendously disrupt a wrestler's offensive on you.
Right.
When they're trying to, get their timing right, shoot in on you and get a takedown, and you're constantly putting something in their midsection that's registering, that's causing some damage, that's maybe, dare I say, zapping the gas tank a little bit of the machine, which is a hard thing to do. We haven't seen it yet, but if anybody could do it, it would probably be Nurmagomedov. So one of the things that I think Umar really needs to implement is the variety of body kicks that he has, because he has more tools in his toolbox when it comes to kicking than Merab does, and I think he can really use those to his advantage. And then obviously the big power body kick, that can start to do some damage, and we all know that Merab fights with a very high guard. His hands are always very high, which is going to leave the body kick open, which, to use the reference of Makhachev versus Volkanovski, that's exactly what Islam did. He worked the body in the second fight. He worked the body really well, got Volk, who also has a high guard, who's also a little bit shorter of a fighter. All of the, similar. Volk and Merab are very different, but similar in those regards, high guard and shorter. You bring those hands down a little bit. Umar's got really crafty question mark kicks, really good head kicks. Maybe he can register one of those of his own.
Absolutely. And I think the kicks are very important, the body kicks, and he's got such a good variety. So before I get into what I think is so good about Umar's kicks, 9 times out of 10, when you're going against a wrestler, I would advise most everybody to not kick that person, because all they want to do is get a hold of one of your legs. That's all a good wrestler needs. And if you kick, now you're giving them the leg, and it's up, it's raised, it's elevated, it's at your, waistline. So body kicks can be very risky against a wrestler. But Umar's a different situation. Umar kicks with such power and such aggression. He's very aggressive when he kicks. And like you said, he covers distance when he strikes. But sometimes he'll jump off that back foot and jump a yard before he puts a side kick into your stomach. And it's really, really well timed. He throws it so viciously, and he's really unpredictable with where the target is in which he's aiming for. Most of the time he goes to the body, but every now and again he'll send one of those push kicks or one of those question mark kicks up to the top. And if your guard's not in the right spot at the right time, you can get shut down. Like you said, Merab has a high guard, so when you're in a fight, there's always going to be something open on you. You're not able to be fully blocked at any given time. So Merab having that high guard is going to open up the body kicks for Umar. But more importantly than the guard being high, Merab is a square fighter. He doesn't fight in the super bladed boxing stance. He does get a little bit more straightforward, which is faster for a wrestler to change levels and get inside. It's like sprinting. Would you want to sprint standing straight forward, or would you want to sprint standing sideways like you're in a boxing stance and then move? So Merab has to stand straight to implement his game plan, but that could be very detrimental against Umar, especially after we saw Sugar get the same success off of push kicks. And I just feel that Sugar and Umar both kick very well to the body, but Sugar didn't have the confidence in his wrestling game that Umar's going to have, and that will open up Umar's ability to kick even harder and not worry about his legs getting caught. If he does, I have a feeling the scrambles will be very interesting to see. But yeah, I think the kicks are very important in this one, which is rare and unique for a fighter that's going up there against a world champion wrestler.
Yeah, you normally wouldn't suggest throwing a lot of kicks against a world-class grappler like Merab, but this situation to me is a little bit different. And
I'll add one last thing to it, because Umar, and we were talking about Merab needing to do feints. Umar is very good at feints. And if he's able to feint with some of those jabs, he can start to open up a whole lot of kicks. The legs, the head, the body, everything's going to open up with good feints from him. And I believe Umar will have more success with his feints than Merab.
Yeah, and the other thing that Umar does really well, he has extensive training in Muay Thai. A lot of people don't know his striking pedigree, but it's equally as impressive as his grappling pedigree,
if not more.
Right, and one thing that he's very good at is he's not lazy with his kicks. A lot of times when you see people getting their kicks caught, it's because they throw them with a high velocity, but the recoil isn't there. They just kind of linger the leg out there and the leg gets caught or whatever. Umar's really disciplined with his kicks. He, when you throw a question mark head kick and then you're right back in place, that's good discipline. That's good technique. And Umar has that in spades. So I expect him to throw those kicks and get the recoil equally as fast and equally as disciplined, which is going to make those leg grab opportunities less available for Merab. So that reduces the risk of getting a kick caught, in my opinion. And then also a lot of times when you see people get the kick caught, it's the power kick, because it's, you're whipping the leg around, you're putting it right into the midsection where somebody can just eat that, grab it, and then go from there. But Umar has like a really good side kick, which you would almost have to catch like a running back being handed a football to some degree, to make an American football reference. Same thing with the push kick. Those are harder to catch than throwing your shin bone, to somebody's side. So Umar, I think, doesn't have to worry too much about getting the kick caught. And again, to go back to point one, if he does get the kick caught, he ends up on the ground with Merab. He has better submission ability down there, and he can certainly hold his own on the ground with Merab. So I think the opportunity cost is in Umar's favor here to throw the body kicks, even if one or two of them get caught.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if he's able to utilize a variety of the kicks and just send them to all different aspects and different parts of Merab's body, he'll frustrate Merab, and the kicks will become harder and harder for Merab to kick when he starts to show more and more variety, because the last thing you want to do is think you've got a read on somebody's body kick, go to try to catch it, and that one goes to the head. You're going to sleep right there.
Exactly. And guys, before we get into point number 3, we have gotten some great comments and great engagement in the comment section here on YouTube. And one thing that we'd love to invite you to join us on is the Barnhill Brothers Discord.
Yep.
We have a great small group of diehard fans that are in there. We're talking about fights. We're hanging out together when the fights are going on. Join us there for the chat. It's always great. There's so many people in there that know so much about MMA that actually it helps Nick and I a lot when we come to create these videos to get takes from people that may be different than our own. So link is going to be in the description to the Discord. Come join the best chat in MMA.
That's right. And we get tons of great comments in the comment section. Lots of great Discord down there. But if you want the best Discord, way more in-depth chats with just everybody in the Barnhill family, then come over to the Discord.
So Nick, that brings me to point number 3. And this one is more of a mental aspect of the game than it is anything else to me. And that's to control the early wrestling exchanges against Merab.
All right.
Merab's a realistic fighter. I think if you were to ask Merab right now, are you a better striker than Umar Nurmagomedov? He would say no. And if he was being honest, he would certainly say no. And if you asked him, what's your best chance to win this fight? He would say, I got to take him down. I got to keep him there. I got to do some damage on the ground.
Right.
So what would be more demoralizing for Merab than to lose a couple of the early wrestling exchanges?
Right.
So I think Umar needs to really put an emphasis, because we know Merab's going to want to get this to the ground as quickly as possible.
Right.
If Umar can counter wrestle and win some of those early exchanges, it's going to do two things. One, Merab might have to overcommit in his chain wrestling, which will open up some striking.
Right.
But to me, the more important aspect of winning some of these early exchanges is you can completely take the wind out of the sails of a fighter when you negate their only path to victory and you do it early.
Right.
So, for example, let's say you're fighting Israel Adesanya and you're a great grappler. When he fought Yoel Romero, we know that was kind of a dud fight. But had Yoel just completely negated the striking in the beginning and landed the better of those exchanges and then got his takedown and just kept rinsing and repeating that, it would have completely taken the wind out of the sails of the striker. So this is kind of the converse of that. So if you can get Merab to where he's frustrated, he's realizing, damn, like I thought I could beat this guy here, but he won the better of those first couple of exchanges, and he landed some good shots of his own. You might see him get demoralized, and then most importantly, you might see him get desperate, and that's where fights can end, when somebody gets desperate and out of place, especially when you're not as good of a striker as your opponent.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And Merab knows that. And even if he made a great video on Instagram, which I'm a big fan of what he's doing content wise, if he did come out, he'd say he's a better striker, but everybody knows. And when he walks out to that cage, Umar is the superior striker. He's got more pop on his shots. He's got, statistically more finishes and at a higher rate and almost everything. So yeah, he's definitely going to have the advantage, but like you said, the game is mental, and MMA is the most wide range combat sport that there is. You can really be a specialist, even in today's world. It's much more rare in today's world, but you can almost be a specialist in today's world if you're good enough. But it's getting harder and harder as the days go on. So I think that Umar has the ability, obviously, to keep this fight on the feet for the majority of the time. I think he'd have to defend a little bit when Merab gets desperate. But if he goes out there and puts his, bites down on his mouth, he puts his chin or puts his forehead in Merab's chest and puts Merab on his back once or twice in the first or second round, it will really change things for Merab. And I believe Merab, being the wrestler that he is, and just kind of understanding the psychology of the wrestlers that we see in the UFC all the time, if they're in there and somebody's trying to one-up them, it's almost like an ego check for wrestlers. And we see it with strikers, but not as competitive. If a boxer's fighting a Muay Thai guy, yes, there's something to there to see which one's better, but the wrestlers are definitely more competitive in that regard. So I think Umar, it would be wise for him to go out there and try to put some offensive wrestling on Merab, because the general consensus is Umar stays on the feet, he wins the fight. Merab takes it to the ground, he wins the fight. But I believe Umar doesn't like the way that second part sounds. I think he wants to show that I can win this fight on the feet. I can also win it on the ground. Merab can't win it on the feet. We all know that. But I'm going to prove to you in a couple of weeks that Merab also can't win it on the ground.
Yeah, and Khabib's camp likes to beat people at what they do best.
Right.
Think about Khabib knocking Conor down.
Yep.
Now, obviously, he won that fight by great ground and pound, taking his back and locking in a rear naked choke. But think about Islam Makhachev versus Volkanovski, too. Volk is one of the most prolific strikers of the last 5 years in MMA. He's beaten Max Holloway 3 times, and we all know how good Max is with his striking. Volk is the guy who, if he were to beat Islam, it would be on the feet. And what happened? Islam knocked him out with a head kick.
Right.
And so the camp Khabib does like to have that chip on their shoulder, like, I'm going to beat you at your own game. So I would not be surprised at all to see Umar actually shoot the first takedown in this fight. And that would be really interesting, especially if he gets it and he's able to do some damage on the ground. That could take Merab out of the game from a very early point in the fight. And so I think that is a very important mental aspect of this fight. Not talking about the physical, because obviously if you get the takedown, you do some damage, you got submissions at your disposal. But even if you don't do much damage and you don't submit Merab, from a mental standpoint, it can do wonders as far as putting deposits in the bank of confidence for Umar and withdrawing them from the bank of confidence for Merab.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Guys, thanks so much for watching this video, and make sure that you stay tuned, hit the like button, subscribe, and hit that bell notification, because the next video we're going to do is the 3 keys to victory from Merab Dvalishvili, and we're going to break this down from a completely different angle. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.